It seems like a lot of games have some kind of devotion to diabolical difficulty, or if not, that the community will stretch and create some kind of impossible challenge. So it feels wrong then that one of the hardest challenges in the base game has seemingly gone unnoticed for so long. Well, apart from the cheating allegations. I will have to talk about cheating in this video, but not the game cheating. This is my video on breaking the world record in the Battle Castle. The Battle Castle is one of the facilities in the Generation 4 Frontier, and every facility in the Frontier has its own gimmick and boss. The castle is a bit unique though, as it combines these two. Caitlin is not just the boss, she is the player's patron. As shown here, Caitlin presides over all matches played in the castle, and awards points to the winner, based on how dominant the victory was. Basically, win faster, don't let your Pokemon faint, and don't take damage. This immediately adds a layer of strategic depth to all matches. But why do we even care about points? Well, as I enter match 2, notice that Garchomp's HP and PP have not been restored. That's right, there's no automatic healing in the castle. You must instead buy healing with points. Points are used for more than just this, but we'll get into that later. Let's have a look at the team. Garchomp is a menace. It preys on easy and vulnerable opponents and turns these matches into free points. But the raw power of Garchomp also has some strategic value. Its famous unresisted offensive type combination and speed allow Garchomp to break strategic and positional deadlocks, or as we will see later, do just enough to help avoid a loss. There are a lot of details in this set, and there's a lot of skill in maximising exactly what Garchomp can achieve, but we'll see that more later. Jumping ahead to match 15, we've earned more than 400 points. But that's all about to disappear. Within a streak, a player can choose to rank up various abilities, although the cost of these is very high. Eventually I'll have to buy everything. For now, I buy item set 1 and 2 and the PP heal option. Another really important use of points is scouting. Now, I think Game Freak had a different idea in mind when they thought about how scouting would work, but for 2 points each time, I can see all of the following. Now, there are over 900 sets in the Frontier, but importantly this is a fixed number, and I simply have them all memorised, on top of knowing all the base stat totals of all Generation 1 to 4 Pokemon. This means that with this information shown, I can identify the exact set within a few seconds. Now, the developers probably intended for the player to interact with a few other mechanics on scouting, and spend more points, but I'm not going to hold anything back when going for the record. Part of the reason why scouting is so strong is in combination with another castle feature. This is level up, specifically plus 5 levels. Now you might think, why on earth make the match any harder? And the answer is the most important character in the video, Caitlin. She likes the ego play of taking on a harder game, and will pay out more points for it. In fact, it can almost double the points earned. In truth, the ego trap here is real, and weaponizing the player's overconfidence is both wonderfully smart and evil from the developers. The direct opponent in this challenge is the game's AI itself. The AI has 3 modes in the Battle Castle, and the third mode is where the gloves really come off, which happens after Battle 28. This makes battles 1 to 28 basically free. Yes, free. Surely nothing could go wrong, right? Just play the clip. This is match 25 and this is Aggron. Now if you remember, I said there were over 900 possible sets you could face, but there are only 474 Pokemon allowed in the Frontier. So what's going on here? Well, the developers loosely split Pokemon into 3 buckets: weak, medium and strong. Weak Pokemon get 1 set, medium get 2 sets, 1 good and 1 bad, and strong Pokemon get 4 sets. These sets try to be as different as possible from one another, without any of them actively sucking. At least that's my interpretation of what they were going for. This is part of the difficulty of the Frontier. If you see a Dragonite, it could be any of 4 sets. Perhaps it's the Dragon Dance set, perhaps it's the Special set, perhaps it's the Coverage set. These sets can behave and act wildly differently to each other. The community have given each set a name based on their index, so this is Aggron 1. Aggron gets a critical hit on Garchomp with its strongest move, and then follows this up with incredible luck on the next 2 teammates too. Against random AI, this is quite an unlikely loss, but I'm actually quite glad it happened. You see, even just 100 wins in a row is a lot. As a comparison, the main storyline of Platinum doesn't even have 100 required battles. And in fact, if we only count the ones the player has any chance of losing, it's more like 15. If you play with a 99% win team, you're unlikely to even get to 100. That may not feel true, but humans are famously really bad at statistics. I think this is the root cause in why some people think the game cheats. The odds aren't really stacked against me, rather it's the raw mathematics of the situation. In any kind of long streak, one match is guaranteed to be the most unlucky match, and the real question is, what are the chances that a player could win this most unlucky match? To put it simply, any streak above 100 wins must be a massive outlier for win rate. In fact, let me visualise this on the screen now. This is the gold symbol. It's the last major landmark that most casual players will be going after. This is 100 wins, and this is 1,000 wins. It's time to breach the topic of cheating on the leaderboards. For over a decade, I've been aware of the top records and assumed that they were legit. But after testing and experimenting with many of these teams, it became clear that many were seriously flawed. I don't want to speculate on if all of them are cheated, as I do believe that many are real. There's a stark dichotomy here of such old records. Either these players were heroes who pulled off unbelievable feats, or they were cheaters who ruined the leaderboards and competition for over a decade. For each of these records, exactly one must be true. Now this is a small community with very low proof requirements. While it is best to assume the best in people, it is also extremely naive to think that only bad players would ever cheat. And if cheating did exist, it's likely that it would dominate the top of the leaderboards. Still, there's something I can do, which is break the record live legitimately on stream. And so we go again. On attempt 2, I decided to just full send and blindly set all opponents to level 55. While risky at the start, I'm barely risking anything at this point in the run, and it will put me in a better points position later on. Match 28 is a simple example of strategy in the castle. I scout Leafeon 2. Now Leafeon 2 is a pest because of its item Bright Powder, which can cause moves to miss, as well as its sleep move and its stat boosting move in Curse. So I have 3 options here. First, I can just go in, hope for no 10% miss and no kind of punish. I could definitely lose if I do this. Second, I can use castle points. After ranking up twice in items, I can buy a wide lens to equip on Garchomp. This is expensive and will only last for a single match, as items are lost at the end of a set. But it will increase Garchomp's accuracy by 10%. Now because of product laws, this does still mean that I have a 1% chance to miss my move, but that's literally 10 times safer than the 10% chance if I don't buy wide lens. So I go in and Garchomp doesn't miss. This still only scratches the surface of what's possible with item management in the castle. If you're waiting for option 3, I'll bring that up later. Because now it's match 29, and match 29 means that Smart AI is here to stay. The Smart AI in Generation 4 does a pretty good job, and it's a lot better than random. I've listed a few key summary points on screen for playing against Smart AI, but let's take a look at a few direct examples. Here, Staking has an 8% chance to use Shadow Claw and a 46% chance to use Facade and Yawn. It can't actually use the move Slack Off at all. And in this example, Ludicolo has a 61% chance to use Double Team and a 39% chance to use Rain Dance. It literally can't use any other move. Now understanding the Smart AI algorithms is not trivial, but it can be critical to winning in some terrible scenarios that we'll see later on. I would like to emphasise that one thing the Smart AI does not do is read or react to the player's inputs. This is kind of one of those long-held myths in the game. Now the third choice for the Leafeon game was the option to pass. As the name might suggest, this literally allows a player to automatically win the match without playing it. As good as this sounds, the drawback is that it costs a whopping 50 points, and will upset Caitlyn, so you don't even get points for winning the match. I think the option to pass single-handedly makes the castle the best and the most skillful facility. Here, your team can actually have intentional weaknesses, so long as you are aware of them, and so long as the team itself can generate enough points to compensate. There's also a lot more responsibility and accountability on the player. This is because you will either lose a match due to entering it voluntarily, or from running out of points and being unable to pass anymore. The gold symbol itself is a sneaky fight, as all of Caitlyn's Pokemon are what I like to call twin sets. Let's take a look at Entei. Entei 3 and Entei 4 have identical stats, nature and items. These are twin sets that cannot be distinguished by simple scouting. Instead, I'll have to rank up the ability to scout for their moves. This makes these sets a lot more expensive to scout, and can put a lot of strain on a team's points bank. Here's a full list of twin sets for anyone curious. And there's actually a bonus one, a special case. Did you know that Typhlosion and Charizard actually have identical base stats? And that Typhlosion 4 and Charizard 2 are actually then twin sets? In this boss fight, Caitlyn generates Empoleon 3 instead of Empoleon 4, and it threatens a Quick Claw Blizzard against Garchomp. Now Freeze is one of the absolute worst mechanics in Pokemon. Even if Garchomp wasn't weak to ice, a long streak requires that a team has counterplay towards being frozen. After all, being forced to skip a turn in any kind of strategy game is a recipe for a loss. 10% freeze is inevitably going to activate multiple times, even within a set of 100 games, let alone 1,000. Even Lumberry doesn't really work, as we'll see later on. But ice types can't be frozen. Enter Lapras. Lapras has spent the last 20 years being overlooked and put aside, but it kind of has exactly what I'm looking for. It barely takes any damage from the ice moves aimed at Garchomp, and the real magic of Lapras is actually in its ability Shell Armor. Now, as abilities in regular play go, Shell Armor is only slightly above useless. But in this kind of challenge, anti-bad luck mechanics are almost essential. Now, Garchomp's set wasn't terribly original. It was just an exercise in perfection on an already very common set. But this Lapras set I think is almost unique. I've never seen anyone use anything quite like this before. It's custom made to come in and isolate an opponent with physical moves, including opponents with moves that can hit Lapras super effectively, and then just blatantly set up right in their face, as they are unable to break through Shell Armor. No other water type could replicate this level of complete reliability in my testing. The other magic of Lapras is that once set up, it's a shockingly good sweeper. It might not look like it, but Ice Shard does just enough damage to pick up most 2 and 3 hit KOs. And it ignores Lapras's low speed, while also being a no contact move for enemies with contact abilities, such as Flame Body, Static, Effect Spore and Aftermath. Even with all of this physical investment, Lapras doesn't even actually have poor special defense in relative terms, and Entei is easily taken out. After Battle 49, we enter the true endgame of the castle. There are no more scripted events, this is just time for the endless Gauntlet, and we'll only see the strongest 700 Pokemon here. And as a reminder, unlike the base game, these all have perfect IVs and EVs. Simple wins will now be rare, and point upkeep is a major concern. Now, this might sound very simple, but if you think about it, 1000 wins means taking out 3000 opponents. But if I can easily set up on every lead, I'm not really taking out 2000 of those opponents fairly. Since if Lapras is instantly taking out backline opponents, they don't have a chance to get a move in, which means they don't have a chance to get lucky. And if you think back to the start of the video, I did mention that you get more castle points for winning at higher HP or taking less damage. You might be wondering if restoring health still counts, and the answer is that it does. Lapras easily wins most matches at full health, which not only gives me more points for winning, but also means I don't need to spend points on healing Lapras between fights. Probably the most easily overlooked aspect of this set though, is its ability to set up on other setup sweepers. It's generally a very bad idea to set up on other setup sweepers because of the way that critical hits ignore defense boosts, which means if you do it enough you're just waiting to be hit by a single crit and then go on to lose. But with Shell Armor, Lapras just completely ignores this lost chance. So if Garchomp is offense and support, and Lapras is anti-physical, what about special opponents? I've saved the best team member for last. I'll keep this brief. See, you're either familiar with Blissey's work or you're not. To those not, while Blissey is not crit immune like Lapras, it takes so little damage from special attacks that crits barely matter to it at all. And as a reality check, a max defense Blissey is actually more physically tanky than Garchomp is. I would say that Blissey's reputation for being physically frail isn't deserved. Natural Cure being able to cure status is an incredibly clutch ability that we'll see multiple times in this video. The special source of this set is actually the speed. It's a very fast Blissey and it's incredibly difficult for Blissey to feint to a slower opponent. And because Frontier sets only invest in speed for already fast Pokemon, this means that Blissey actually does outspeed a devastating number of opposing sets. The bread and butter here is the unholy combination of Substitute and Soft Boiled. I'll detail Substitute later, but for right now I'll just say it's probably the best move in the entire game. And Soft Boiled almost makes Blissey simply unkillable. Blissey's ability to defang opponents by running them out of moves is actually very helpful for Garchomp and Lapras, as it can often tee up a setup for both of them. Seismic Toss is really about control and the predictability of the move. Again, I'll loop in later to show exactly what I mean by this. Now, experienced players may have some questions and concerns about this team. The obvious one is the clear weakness to fighting, and a secondary concern with certain dangerous type combinations. There's also concerns about Calm Mind, Oko moves, and incredibly powerful physical attackers. These weaknesses can be manageable, but they are still very real, and it is by design that this team has made the trade-off by turning some matchups into guaranteed wins at the cost of having other matches where I must skip on certain opposing leads. But there's one final use of strategic castle points: level down. This is very expensive at 15 points, and doesn't fix critical specific dangers such as Machamp 3, but it's roughly a 20% hit to the opponent's power and bulk, in addition to completely shutting down Oko moves. And while expensive, this is still cheaper than passing. About 6 hours in, I hit battle 106. Up until now, I've tried to present games as individual matchups, but it's really a team game. I will try to visually show what happens in my head when preparing for a match. 106 is dangerous because while each of Aerodactyl 3, Lucario 2 and Heracross 4 can be dealt with, The combination of all three in this order can cause problems. Usually I'd simply take out this Aerodactyl with Garchomp, but if I do this, Lucario will come in, and while Garchomp is still locked in Outrage, Lucario will KO Garchomp. With Garchomp out of the way like this, Lucario just gets to destroy the team. In fact, it's worse, Heracross 4 is also quite dangerous. Garchomp needs to buy a Choice Band in order to pick up this KO. This may sound like enough of a headache to skip, but the game isn't actually that bad. I should be able to set up Lapras on Aerodactyl, and as part of this setup, Blissey is completely expendable. In the battle, Blissey takes 2 hits and heals, but on turn 3, Aerodactyl lands a crit and a flinch on Blissey. Then it follows up with another flinch. Overall, this is super unlucky. The issue isn't that Blissey fainted, I was expecting that, but it fainted while only forcing 4 uses of the move Rock Slide. It's this that really hurts Lapras's chances. Lapras now has to set up on Rock Slide. I'm about 77% to win from this scenario of Lapras, but Aero finds the flinch on turn 2, and then picks up the KO without missing any of the 7 Rock Slides it's used this game. This is a true nightmare. But despite this, it's not yet time to give up. Garchomp can still win, it just has to crit Lucario. The first loss was a stumble, but this one was a gut punch. The chance of this happening was about 1 in 1100, but that's just not good enough. The team and I both must play at a much higher level than this to make reaching 1000 wins realistic. What's worse is that I misplayed this battle tactically. Aerodactyl will dodge the 2-hit KO from Ice Shard due to its Yachi Berry, but it won't dodge the 3-hit KO. And Ice Shard goes first, so Lapras can't be flinched if it's doing this, and Shell Armor removes the chance of any crits happening. Going for this would have almost completely incapacitated Lapras, and indeed, Garchomp would lose the final 1v2, as Choice Band only allows it to use a single move. However, the deeper vision is that Lucario would never Ice Punch Lapras, and Garchomp can come in on any non-crit Ice Punch and then Earthquake Lucario. It may seem like Garchomp would then lose to Heracross, but I can simply sacrifice Lapras and reset the Choice Band lock on Garchomp, and then I would win. This line would have been about a 1 in 2000 loss. It was clearly correct, and I almost immediately saw it in hindsight after the match. I was very frustrated for missing this and for getting tunnel vision on the pre-match strategy, but I was also angry at underestimating Aerodactyl's odds to do this. Of course, the largest mistake was actually entering the battle at all against a level 50 Aerodactyl. Both skipping and level down were viable options, and the fact that I did neither is a bigger red flag, particularly with 800 points in the bank. These 800 points are now all gone, you start each streak from 0. Perhaps RPG players might understand the desire to save resources. How many of you have never used your Max Revives, Master Ball or Elixirs in-game because there was a limited supply? Psychologically, I can say there was something very scary about running low on castle points. But this was days of playing just thrown away, and I was now really starting to doubt if the combination of the team and myself were even capable of reaching 1000 wins. After all, the record of 131 wins, 2 losses is very, very far away from 1000 wins and 0 losses. The loss felt like my fault, but I was also aware that it could be the team just limiting me too much in terms of strategy. So I decided on a simple goal, 300. I had to hit that next time, or I'd either quit or go back to the drawing board. And at this point I was still not even aware of the hardest aspect of this challenge. So I naively just go again. There is no real failure until I actually give up after all. I build momentum quickly, and in Battle 47 I had a funny highlight. After a special defense drop, Mismagius can create a 2v1. Initially this might seem quite bad, because Blissey cannot touch Mismagius, and Lapras just directly loses to Thunderbolt. But Blissey is actually designed for these battles. No ghost types in the frontier can actually take it down either. And Blissey has more PP than them all, and will force them to simply struggle and KO themselves. This is actually why I run Minimize over Double Team. Minimize simply has more PP. Match 93 highlights an important part of maximising AI knowledge. This match looks rough on first glance. Gallade 4 doesn't beat me, but it does prevent a safe setup. That's usually okay, but Machamp 4 is a must-skip Pokemon. However, if Garchomp picks up the KO on Gallade, then Flygon must come in next due to AI switching rules. Lapras is actually so bulky it can set up directly on Flygon's Outrage, including the turn required to switch in. With Lapras at +6 defense and +6 attack, Machamp is no longer a problem. 94 is also a funny throwback. Blissey is actually a surprisingly good sweeper with Minimize. Infernape is another problem Pokemon, and it's basically a menace to every team. Here Infernape comes out against Blissey, except I already actually have Substitute up. Infernape 3 is faster, and a critical hit Focus Blast will KO Blissey. But Focus Blast only has 5 PP. Blissey can simply substitute 5 times even though it's slower, completely neutralise the threat, and then go on to sweep. In fact, I do the same thing against fighting types with close combat. These sets also just lose to Substitute Blissey. It took several hours, but I did scramble back to 106. Incredibly, even though opponents are randomised and most matches are quite easy, 106 is once again a huge problem. I was 2 hours into streaming and commentating on a totally different topic when it came around. I give Garchomp a focus sash in order to avoid losing to a crit Brave Bird, and plan to sweep after a single Sword Stance. With the safety of focus sash, I can raise the levels of both Pokemon in the back to level 55. But there's a simple mistake here. Charizard 4 has a timid nature and not modest, as is most common for set 4s. This means at level 55 it will outspeed Garchomp. The dread was starting to rise here. I'd seen simple errors and bad lock combinations before, and lost to them. Indeed, on turn 2, Charizard does activate a special defense drop with Focus Blast. It doesn't follow this up with a huge luck required to win directly, but I'm in a surprisingly bad situation, as while Blissey can stall out Charizard, I'd be too low on PP against the Moltres, and so I must KO Charizard earlier than this. However, I also don't have time to safely switch out and reset Blissey's special defense, as I might need to switch out later on in the game, and Blissey should just lose to a Moltres packing Roost. The catch is a curious oversight in the smart AI. The AI will refuse to heal if it's faster than the opponent. This leaves a very simple way forward for a near guaranteed win. Blissey can simply attack. While on the topic of smart AI quirks, let's talk about Substitute. Substitute is probably the most broken move in the game. This is because the AI is almost completely blind to it, and will often endlessly blunder status moves into it while they do nothing. This is fairly common and creates a lot of nearly free wins for Garchomp, simply through the combination of Substitute and Sword Stance. And then to complete this circus show of a match, the final opponent self-KOs with Curse. I get a rude reminder at the end of this 3-hour stream though. Kaleido 4 appears and answers the question you might have of why a Cursed Lapras runs max defense. It flinches 4 out of 5 times with Rock Slide. It's inevitable that this kind of 1% luck will happen a lot in the streak though, and all future examples of bad luck will be much, much worse than this. Match 159 is a small nightmare. Or is it? Leafeon can create havoc at level 50, but after setting it to 45, either Garchomp or Lapras is guaranteed to set up on it. Rhyperior comes in next. Now I expect most viewers to have a sense of how dangerous this situation is, as Choice Band Rhyperior can easily beat all 3 Pokemon I have. Indeed, Garchomp goes down to Hammer Arm. However, this is actually all according to plan. Something I've hinted at is the mental simulation of battles, and planning extremely far ahead into the future. After revealing all 3 sets, it took me about 5 seconds to see 15 moves deep, and in the next 5 seconds I could see the entire end of the match through all possible scenarios. This thing probably sounds impossible or like exaggeration. After all, I'm not a genius, and actual professionals in other turn-based games like chess cannot instantly see so far into the future, but the trick is forced low variance sequences. Pokemon's branching factor is actually massive. This makes seeing far into the future very difficult, even for computers. But there are tricks around this, and Substitute is the absolute king of reducing the branching factor in Pokemon. A faster Pokemon using the move Substitute creates an exceptionally simple turn. There are only 2 scenarios that could happen here, and it's trivial to only consider the worst one. It's actually trivial to train these 2. That means if I know what happens after 1 substitute, I could also know what happens after 5 substitutes. Now all of that sounds very fancy, but none of that actually means that I win the game. After all, Rhyperior is about to destroy everything with its Hammer Arm. Some experienced viewers might have noticed this earlier, hidden in Blissey's HP. Blissey has 337 HP, which is actually a very specific number. The community call this a leftovers number, and it means after using 4 substitutes and healing 4 times with leftovers, Blissey will have exactly 85 HP left, which is exactly enough for 1 final substitute. This is very intentional, and it also means that Rhyperior will take 6 Hammer Arms to get through Blissey instead of 5. So with 3 Hammer Arm PP left, Lapras enters. Lapras now has exactly enough time to use 3 substitutes on the last 3 Hammer Arms, and then also use a single curse before rest. This is critical because it completely stops Gliscor from being able to win with Stone Edge after a single curse boost. Which means Lapras easily beats it, as remember Lapras has Shell Armor. This might have sounded like a lot, but really with some practice it isn't. The team can do precise plays like this constantly by design, and as I explained, it's actually quite easy to spot them, and it's not very stressful to play them out either. I also decide on a simple anti-misclick plan. Whenever I enter a new round, I always buy leftovers on Blissey and Lapras immediately. I justify this by the fact that they almost always end up with leftovers anyway, and I'm doing quite well on points at this stage, and the punishment of entering a match without leftovers on them could be massive. Now, if you've been paying very close attention, you might notice that some of these trainers are actually themed. For example, sailors run water and fighting types, veterans use legendaries. Let me introduce you to my favourite trainer. This wonderful typo of a man only runs electric and ghost types, which often means a free win for Garchomp, and a lot of points. Teams without an electric immunity should be terrified of these kind of matchups, as paralysis is up there as one of the easiest possible ways to lose, with just a touch of bad luck. Now in the next 20 to 30 hours, I finally start to play very well, and the team finally starts to behave like I designed it to. I'll use this stretch of games to quickly go over some of the strategic depth reached by Garchomp. Perseberry is exceptionally cheap for how useful it is to not get confused by Outrage. Lum and Chesto are also sometimes picked up when they apply. It was actually quite rare to find that many uses for Focus Sash. Choice Scarf really isn't used that much, as most Pokemon faster than Garchomp already lose to it. But I'll give Choice Scarf a shout out, as when I need it, I really need it. One of the strongest options is actually the Lychee and Salac berries. Now it can be difficult to get these to safely activate, but the castle almost offers a unique cheat code. You see, I don't have to heal Garchomp every single time. In fact, it can be very helpful if Garchomp is already damaged, as the Salac or Lychee berry will activate on turn 1 of the match. There are a few mini gems, like this situation when I know exactly when the AI is going to switch out and exactly what it's going to switch to. But more common and less flashy moments are these kind of stall outs, as Lapras and Blissey just frankly bully the opponents. But coming into the 500s, something's starting to go wrong. Cracks are starting to appear in my gameplay, and indeed this set of 100 battles proved to be the worst collective gauntlet of the entire run. First up is 463. I first correctly sacrificed Blissey for manipulating Garchomp's HP, to ensure that Heracross will attack and put me safely into Lychee range after the substitute. Everything about this is correct, but I've messed up. I should not have even entered this match. This Heracross has a focus band, that's a blanket 10% chance to survive any attack. The problem is, at this point it's already too late. I'm fully committed to this strategy, and I need to hit the 90%. If 10% focus band activates, I would not automatically lose, but Lapras probably would then have to hit another 90%. But nothing happens. I wonder how many players go through matches like these, blissfully unaware of how badly they are playing, or how close they come to losing. Match 501 is almost the exact halfway mark, and the castle has prepared a nasty trap. Glalie 4 is an exceptionally dangerous set that must be sent to level 45. In hindsight, I think I was blinded by this as the primary threat, and entered autopilot mode. Ambipom and Manectric are both not usually problems, as Lapras and Blissey both safely take them out respectively. I send Ambipom to level 55. However, there is a problem. When Lapras comes in, I notice it's running far too low on move PP to beat both Glalie and Ambipom separately. This is still a small error and should not be a problem. But after Manectric comes in, I do miss because of Bright Powder. Staying in here was reckless. I definitely should have switched to Garchomp immediately. And I didn't notice that there was an infinite stall out potential between Lapras and Garchomp, where Ambipom will simply KO itself from Life Orb recoil. Basically, I risked around a 2% chance that Blissey would have to win a 1v2. And while Blissey is still favoured to do this, there was a very real chance of losing. All of this could have been avoided either by remembering to heal Lapras, or by simply not levelling up Ambipom, so it wouldn't outspeed Garchomp. But these kind of micromanagement errors happen. 564 is the absolute worst luck I get in the entire run. The preview itself looks fairly innocent. Aggron, Bastiodon and Heracross are just about threatening enough that I am going to pay attention. And I identified that this must be a Blissey sweep, because Bastiodon 3 will outspeed Lapras after a setup, and Aggron 2 won't allow Garchomp the option to safely set up. I go to Blissey and everything's going fine. I set up the +6 evasion, and I'm behind a substitute, so I start going for Seismic Toss. Aggron 2 does hit 2 moves in a row, and I note that I actually don't want to substitute quite yet. I want to substitute 1 turn before I KO the Aggron, to make sure sub is up in case a Quick Claw activates. And this is all because I would never want Blissey to face Heracross without substitute, and so I go for one final Seismic Toss before using substitute. However, something goes disastrously wrong here. The AI switches to Heracross. AI switches are incredibly rare and only possible under certain circumstances, and even then, it's based on a probability of 1/4. Basically, everything had gone wrong. Aggron had to hit both of those moves against a +6 evasion Blissey, it had to be on that turn as I was going for Seismic Toss, and the 1 in 4 chance had to activate. But complaining aside, it's time to focus on just how bad the situation is. Without substitute up, Heracross can easily beat Blissey. It will also easily beat Lapras. Now Garchomp could take out the Heracross, but it could only do so by using Outrage, at which point Aggron comes back in and Garchomp would faint. There is no good decision here, I simply have to make the least bad one. Although staying in with the +6 evasion Blissey is tempting, it's actually the most likely way I could lose. and I realise that I have to sacrifice Lapras. However, this sacrifice is not quite in vain, as it allows Lapras to use a single Ice Shard. This Ice Shard is actually massive, and saves Garchomp, as without the Ice Shard damage, Garchomp would have to Outrage, but with it, Garchomp can actually Earthquake this Heracross. And this means that Garchomp can switch out when Aggron 2 comes back in. Now Garchomp doesn't have to switch out here, it's just that if I stay in, I'm risking the 20% Quick Claw chance. If Quick Claw activates here, Garchomp feints to Ice Punch, and it's a Blissey 1v2. Blissey would be in a lot more trouble than normal, as without any teammates alive, Blissey would not be able to activate its natural cure ability. And so, the play is obvious, I have to switch to Blissey on this Ice Punch. This isn't really too bad, we saw early in the match that Blissey doesn't take very much damage from Ice Punch. Ice Punch freezes Blissey. I spent almost the entire past 60 hours being immune to freeze because of Lapras, and now in this single game where something has gone wrong and I've lost Lapras, I'm suddenly faced with it. But it's not a disaster, Natural Cure is still active. It's a fairly easy decision to bring Garchomp in, and Garchomp comes in on this Metal Claw. I can then return to the non-frozen Blissey. Ice Punch freezes Blissey. Now to be honest, this is quite bad, but it's not much worse than the first situation, and Blissey can still be cured in the same way. Garchomp comes in, and Metal Claw hits, and Metal Claw gets a 10% attack boost. The situation is now rapidly deteriorating. That attack boost makes Aggron a much more threatening Pokemon, and it makes it much more difficult for me to switch between Garchomp and Blissey. Still, I do not want to risk the 20% Quick Claw, so I do need to go back to Blissey. Ice Punch freezes Blissey. While this is starting to get really bad, I do still have just enough time to save Blissey. I go Garchomp, and Aggron gets a 10% attack boost again. That's 5 10% activations in the last 6 turns, or a 1 in 20,000 event. But more importantly, I'm completely out of time here. I cannot go back to Blissey. Although Blissey could survive, it's very unlikely that Blissey would be able to take on a +2 attack Aggron. It is now time for Garchomp to risk the Quick Claw. If Quick Claw activates right now, I'm definitely favoured to lose. Aggron 2 does not get the Quick Claw, and Garchomp ends it and Bastiodon free. Now the question is, fully paying attention, do I see this scenario unfolding? Maybe, I'm not sure. If I include the original resist switch scenario, as well as all the 10% chances, I'm looking at a roughly 1 in 700,000 game. This is the kind of luck that any real long streak must dodge, but I honestly couldn't help but feel annoyed. After all, I spent the entire streak avoiding freeze, and then when it does have a small chance to happen, it instantly all seems to go wrong at once. I know the Battle Frontier isn't sentient, I've seen the code, but moments like this really make it feel like it's out to get me. I really wish that this was the last close game of the 500s, but it's not. Here's 571. Something I'd always been afraid of in the castle was a misclick. You see, for most of these screens there's no confirmation box. I always scroll down to opponent, and what's just below opponent? Battle. Battle is one of these options that has no confirmation box. That's right, on 571 I misclick and immediately enter the battle, without healing, scouting or doing anything else. Now I could call it luck, but I could also call it by design, but the simple fact is that the team actually didn't need healing for once. However, I was vulnerable to a very small list of sets that give me massive trouble if they do appear in the lead. These are the kind of sets that I normally want to either pass or level down. The opponent leads with Snorlax. This is not a good lead, but it's not a bad lead either. I close the match out quite precisely, but I do finally know what the true final boss of this challenge will be. Not misclicking, it's something that had been going for a while, and finally snapped. And it took a few of these disaster games to really bring it into focus. You see, there is a soft insanity to certain challenges. In fact, let me demonstrate this. This is the Mackworth clock test. You just need to follow the dot and note when it skips. They used it in World War II to determine how, over time, performance can decline in very repetitive tasks. And as you might expect, people got worse and worse as the tests went on. If I succeed in this challenge, it'll be almost 100 hours of gameplay. I actually tried to find a single example from another game which had this kind of length, and I couldn't, at least not a challenge that's over 10 hours long, which means that with a single mistake, the player can completely be reset to the start. I could blame the planning stage before each match. If I just had to play the match, I wouldn't go through nearly as much mental energy. But the cause is kind of irrelevant, let me talk about the symptoms. A large part of me felt the call of the void. I actually kind of wanted to lose. Not for any rational reason, it was just a thought that kept popping into my head. I also kept distracting myself when planning with overly creative or silly winning options beyond the obvious and safer ones. I also started playing a lot more aggressively, wanting to end games faster. And I couldn't really find a solution. I tried taking breaks, but coming back even days later didn't actually help. I also considered blooding a completely new team, although this would have been a great risk too. Something that did help a bit was the live commentary. Live commentary definitely slows down my thought process and makes me play worse in general. In fact, I'm almost certainly dumber. But it also holds my thought patterns and my play to be a bit more responsible. There was one thing I was sure of though, this was going to be it. Either for the challenge or for this team. I had about half a streak left to go, but I knew I was playing much worse now. I pushed through the 600s without any major incident. But on 726 I make a stupid error. I see the combination of Inner Focus, Adamant and Razor Claw, and snapped aside its Crobat 4 without properly checking anything else. But this is obviously actually Dragonite. It is essential to scout properly with this team. I am lucky that Lapras doesn't really care about either of them, and therefore I'm not actually punished. The cracks in my play are definitely spreading at this point, but I think if I can play fast enough, perhaps I can reach the goal before it becomes critical. The next 100 battles kind of drifted by though. The randomness of the Frontier can be difficult. In a regular game, you know what's coming up, and you know what's going to be hard and what's going to be easy. But here, any match could be hard or easy, and the previous match being easy or hard has no impact on it. But I knew a close game was going to happen before the record. And indeed, 8-4-5 was that moment. The Xander moment. This is the worst match I played in the entire run. Xander leads with Ursaring. This is a problematic set, and does need to be dealt with immediately. That means level 45 and a choice band on Garchomp. But I've made a small mistake. Out of Mamoswine and Rhyperior, it's actually Mamoswine that would come in next, whereas I had wrongly assumed that it would be Rhyperior. I switched to Lapras on the Avalanche aimed at Garchomp. On the surface, this seems like a good idea, because I know it's unlikely the AI will actually use Curse enough at the start. Irritatingly, the AI does chain together a series of almost optimal turns, and I realised that my mental calculation was slightly off. Doing mental damage estimates has served me very well for the past 1,000 games, but I'm slightly off here, and I'm slightly off in a very dangerous way. You see, Mamoswine is strong enough to free-shot Lapras. The reason why this matters is because Rest takes 3 turns to complete, and with Lapras out of the way, Mamoswine would almost certainly sweep me. It would be wrong to blame this on bad luck, as this was an entirely plausible turn of events, and also an entirely avoidable one. I could have just sacrificed Garchomp. The total damage I would have done to Mamoswine, combined with Seismic Toss ignoring defense boosts, would have made that an easy win, although a close one. Instead, I am risking everything on these 3 Earthquake damage rolls. Now, the odds are slightly in my favour, and I can do a bit of health bar manipulation. And in the end, Lapras does actually survive. But I was kind of stunlocked about getting such a basic mental calculation wrong. And this is not the last time we will see Xander. In fact, my thought process was so scattered by this, that for the second time in the streak, I misclicked straight onto battle without doing any scouting or any preparation for 8-4-6. 8-4-6 wasn't too bad in the end, but I mostly say by a habit that I picked up when I started automatically healing between fights no matter what. I had come way too close to losing in these 2 fights, and it really rattled my confidence. It's time to bring up something that I've been tracking for the entire streak. This is my graph of castle points over the last 850 battles. It kind of shows how well I've been playing, and while I had started out strong, this was clearly no longer the case. Lower down the leaderboard, a lot of streaks end early because they're unable to optimise point gain. Now maybe you're thinking, so what? But let me draw the direct parallel here. I'm probably only playing about as well as other streaks are that barely hit 100 wins. And yet, I've got over 100 battles left. However, I'm sitting on almost 5,000 points, which is roughly 100 passes. In other words, I could get the record immediately if I wanted to. It would just cost me my entire bank. But something felt wrong about this. I was not here to get the record, I was here to break it. I didn't want to grovel at the final hurdle, or find an easy way out. Losing would be devastating, but it would be against the spirit of the challenge to just jump ahead to the end. The team had definitely proven itself at this point. The only opponent left was myself and my wavering focus. A very intentional part of my strategy was now simplification. Garchomp had spent most of this streak juggling around various items, but I was increasingly limiting it to either Lumberry or Choice Band. At the start of the 889 to 897 set, I bought Garchomp a Choice Band. On 898 I went to Persenberry, but then on 899 I re-equip a Choice Band. This is totally normal. What was weird was battle 902. The safest strategical line here required Choice Band removal. and the cheapest way to do this is simply by buying a Persian berry for 2 points. 902 goes fine. But then comes 903. Breloom is a nasty opponent with Effect Spore, but so long as Garchomp takes it out, even if Effect Spore puts Garchomp to sleep, I should still be able to win here. I then spend the remainder of the time focusing on the levels of Moltres and Typhlosion. I'm happy with the preparation and enter the battle. I only realised a mistake in the battle itself. I'd spent the entire stream playing with a Choice Band Garchomp, but this wasn't a Choice Band Garchomp anymore. While thinking about so many other things, I'd simply forgotten. The upshot is that Breloom can then survive Outrage. This Breloom set runs Spore and Focus Punch. On its own, that's not a problem. Outrage and Ice Shard will be able to take it out. The problem is Breloom's item, Shell Bell. Shell Bell doesn't see much serious use. It heals you based on how much damage you do, which is often very situational, and usually a player would just take the extra power that another item can offer. But this Shell Bell is a perfect item for Breloom in this situation, as Breloom can be due a massive heal on both Garchomp and Blissey if it hits them. So a lot is stacked against me here, but there are actually a few things in my favour. First, my Blissey is actually faster than this Breloom, which guarantees a move at least. Second, Effect Spore could easily backfire on Breloom here. A Paralysis or Poison on Garchomp could actually be a good thing for me. Third, it's still possible that Outrage and Ice Shard together could do enough damage to take out this Breloom, even with the Shell Bell healing. But most importantly, the AI is quite likely to fumble this advantage. Without getting into the details, its algorithms for Spore and Focus Punch are pretty suboptimal, and it's quite likely to just choke, at least against one of my Pokemon. The match gets off to one of the worst starts possible, with Garchomp asleep at the end of turn 1. Luckily, Breloom chokes on turn 2. Encouraging Giga Impact from the AI is another point in my favour here, and it gives Garchomp enough time to wake up and KO it back. Matches like these highlight something that might not be implicitly obvious. The team is kind of designed to allow one or two small errors. There's just so much bulk, and it's just so difficult to take out each team member. A lot of other teams would lose if they got a single matchup wrong, or even if they got a single turn wrong. But there's a lot of flexibility and backup here. I am quite fond of how this team plays. I placed even more of an emphasis on simple, non-complex wins. And somehow knocked out the rest of the battles in the 900s, ending at 994. Now, when I started streaming again from 994, I knew that I would either lose or break the record. The stream itself had the most chat engagement ever, and while I was grateful for the support, I also knew that I was quite badly distracted. Match 1008 came, and there were no nasty surprises. And now it was on to match 1009, the world record breaking game. Who appears at 1009? Well, of course it's Xander. Xander, who gave me the biggest scare of the entire run. This is a 1% coincidence, but again, the game almost feels sentient here. The good news was that scouting had revealed Shuckle 2. Now, after I broke the world record in the factory and made a tier list, I put Shuckle 2 as one of the worst sets you could possibly get. Garchomp gets a completely free setup here and manages to rip Xander's team apart. 100 hours, 1009 wins in a row. It was over. At the time, I remember I wanted to laugh, but because it was a live stream, I tried to keep things a bit more professional. Reaching a challenging goal, particularly one set publicly and while risking failure, and doing something beyond your current ability, leaves a special kind of feeling. I think people who've never done it may think it's called happiness. Some call it satisfaction, but I would call it growth, and a bit of relief. There were several parts of this run which were not great, but I was quite proud of finishing it. I may never know if the records I beat were legitimate or not, but I do know that I had a huge amount of respect for anyone else who ever has or ever will do something like this. And I knew one more thing. This record will not last forever. Even if no one else plays, my streak is still ongoing, and my next goal will try to be to cap out the castle points at 9,999. This will be very hard, much harder than reaching 2,000 wins. It's also the sunset of this team. They won't be coming back. I'm proud of how well they did, but equally completely sick of using it. They never really let me down, it was always my fault. I hope the Frontier gets a bit more activity, but I also understand why very difficult challenges and very long challenges don't seem terribly attractive. If you are hungry for more Frontier content, I'm going to link LRXC's video on the Emerald Battle Factory World Record. If you made it this far, thank you for watching.